Baumann. Priscilla is familiar to most of us here. She's lived in town for a long time and has presented some wonderful programs here. Her background includes a BA and an MA in French literature and a PhD in medieval studies. She's particularly interested in medieval French art, architecture, and cultural history. Priscilla was awarded a Fulbright scholarship to complete her MA in French literature at the Sorbonne in Paris, where she met her future husband, Roger. After a long residence in Paris, Priscilla taught at the Radcliffe Seminars, Radcliffe College for 14 years, where she was cited as Distinguished Instructor of Art History. She has been visiting lecturer at Tufts University and presently offers courses at the Art Institute of Boston at Lesley University. She has organized and led several study tours to France, and since 1983 has been a docent at the Harvard University Art Museums. Priscilla has published articles in scholarly journals and lectures frequently in the Boston area. Please welcome Priscilla Baumann.
Thank all of you for coming. Let's see now. This is very fancy. I've never worn one of these. Thank you. Is it on? It's on. It is definitely on, and you should hear me.
No.
Louder, please.
No, can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
So zip up your sweater. But it's on the side. Right here. Oh, this, why should I zip up my sweater?
Put it on your collar.
That's what I thought. I didn't see where. So we're talking.
Also Mardi Gras.
And it's also Mardi Gras, which is what I was going to say because Eleanor loved parties. But that's much better to say National Anthem. For all those reasons, we will enjoy this very much. One of you asked me why the title, because obviously we know a great many things about Eleanor. Why did I say the elusive Eleanor of Aquitaine? Well, I was trying, first of all, to catch an audience. That always does it. But also, it is elusive, and quickly I will tell you why. We're not sure the year of her birth. We don't know exactly where she died, although we think we know when. We don't know anything about her physically, and you would think that someone who was supposed to be so attractive and dashing and flirtatious would have been described by someone silenced. Nothing about her hair, her height, her demeanor, except they'll say she was more than beautiful. Well, that doesn't tell you one thing. More than beautiful is a special word which avoids all details. Now, the one detail that does come through, and this is why I am calling this the elusive Eleanor of Aquitaine, one scribe said that she had sparkling black eyes. Nobody else said that. They all said she had eyes, and they were describing it with 3 words. I'm going to show you this because it's very, very interesting. Well, I can just say it. The word in French for green is V-E-R-T, vert. They use that word to describe her eyes. They also use the word V-E-R-R-E, which means glass. Now, glass can be many different colors. You've seen old Roman glass. Sometimes it's pale green, sometimes it's gray, sometimes it's something else. And then they also use the word V-A-I-R. And V-A-I-R refers to the fur of the Siberian squirrel, which was multicolored, gray, black, white, and was used to warm cloaks in the winter. Now, in the Middle Ages, there were no rules for spelling. So, someone may have wanted to say she had grayish eyes. Gray is not a very good color, is it? Maybe hazel eyes would be the there, because that means multicolored or changing colors. And he spelled it V-E-R-R-E because he thought he was spelling V-A-I-R. And so there's this whole mix-up, all right? So she's elusive because there are no details that we would like to know. We don't know about her health. She had 10 children. Nothing is ever mentioned about any of that except that so-and-so was born. And she lived longer than the average person in the Middle Ages, apparently healthy until almost the very, very end when she felt tired. and quite righteously so, from having made all these travels across the Alps and across the Pyrenees and traveling to the Crusades twice and doing all these things, plus running the country of England when her son was gone, plus running all of this very disputational region of hers that was her dowry. So it's just that I call her elusive because much of what we, particularly as women, would like to know, we don't know and we will never know. That's all. And it was also to get you here. So, all right, so what I'm going to do is start the slides, but I just want to go through the dates so you can get her placed in your mind. And this is here for you to write down or just to remember. Sometimes if you see the numbers, it's easier. She lived to be 82, so she died in her 83rd year. There is no mention anywhere of her having any health problems at any time, or tooth problems or anything. So, and they mention that with kings, and they mention it sometimes with normal people, ordinary people, but she didn't. When she was 15, and I noticed as I did all this, I was pulling it together thinking I only have an hour to do this, that everything, the changes in her life seemed to go in clumps of 15 years, 15 or 16 years. It's almost magically done. When she was 15, she married the man that became the King of France, Louis VII. He wasn't king when she married him, but his father died the month that they were on their honeymoon, and so he became king while they were on their honeymoon. So she was suddenly Queen of France, which at the time was far less important than being the Duchess of Aquitaine. That's what we have to understand. France was just a puny little area stuck over near the Elusive Falls, and it had no real political power yet. By the time Eleanor dies, France is marching along, taking this region, that region, and other regions, and the whole Aquitainian idea gets submerged. Okay, so she's 15, and what did she do between her birth and that point? There's nothing that we know except two little slivers. One of them is that her father, who wrote poetry, her grandfather was a great troubadour. There was something in that Eleanor inherited, certainly, but her father insisted that she learn to read and write Latin and to speak it. Now that was the diplomatic language and the clerical language, ecclesiastical language. Few women had that ability, and her father, since he had lost his only son, knew that she would be the inheritor of his vast, vast estate, which included all the land from the Loire River down to the Pyrenees, from the Atlantic to the central part of France. It was 10 times larger than the Kingdom of France, and very, very rich agriculturally, very rich from trade purposes, and a lovely, lovely country, okay? So that's one thing we know, that she learned Latin. Well, that doesn't help us very much. The other thing, though, that she loved, apart from dancing, was riding horseback. She was an excellent rider, and on 3 or 4 occasions, she saved her life herself by outriding the ambushers who were after her. That meant she was not riding side saddle, although they didn't mention that, but you can't do that unless you're riding the way you should be riding. And she loved to hunt with the falcon. Oh. All right, so you often see the women with their falcons, were a sign of great wealth, because it was more expensive to raise a falcon and train it than it was to have a horse and feed and train it. So those are just the only 2 things I can offer for her up to 15, but you can imagine a very pleasant life, a cheerful life. That part of France, near Poitiers, is lively, and it's just like a different country. The people are extremely open, very hospitable, quick to anger. They love to sing, to talk, and they are very brave. I mean, I'm making generalizations, but it's an amazing thing. So I'm saying that because when she marries Louis, where does she go? She goes to Paris. Paris at that time was a city of gloom. Nothing that we know, like Notre Dame, had been built yet. There were other Merovingian buildings with little tiny windows, no light. Gloom. The roads were not covered with stone yet, so everything was mud. There were pigs running in the streets. And the only good thing that I can think of is that when she lived in the Louvre, this very, very miserable Louvre at the time, the only thing I can think of that's good is the University of Paris was just sort of beginning to be formed, and the Quartier Latin, where all the students were speaking Latin, which is why we call it that, was lively. And she is known to have gone to some of the disputations and things like that. That attracted her, but that was about it. All right. Now, I gave you beautiful, up to 15, right? And then the arrival in Paris. She was married for 15 years, and then Louis divorced her. Why? For one of those reasons that so many rulers do. He actually was very fond of her, but she had only given him 2 daughters. And that just wasn't good enough. However, Eleanor, too, wanted to get out of the marriage because she had essentially married a monk, and he was just not of her ilk. And she knew that if she could get away, she already had her eye, I think, on Henry. She chose him. It was all done in secrecy. There are no records whatsoever. Probably nothing was written down. It was a verbal agreement. You can imagine what was going on. So in 1152, she gets the divorce decree, and after she's assured that all her lands come back to her, because that was, she was a very politically geared person, thanks to her father, she had to get from Paris to safety. And she set out with a few people on horseback, of course, and that was where they had 2 ambushes. And some of her cohort were killed. She got away, only because she could ride faster, took devious routes, and got safe. Very brave woman. So that's then. So in 8 weeks, between the decree and that, 8 weeks later, she becomes then the Duchess, not just of Aquitaine, but of Anjou and Maine, and later of Normandy. So it's interesting, but who did she marry? A man who was, she was then 30, a man, Henry, who was 19. No wonder they had children afterwards. But the thing is, she wanted someone vigorous who would fight for what was necessary. She had married a kind of willy-nilly man, and he wasn't too interested in her, and more interested in praying and the church and so forth. And so ultimately, he turned out to be a relatively good ruler, but not at the beginning. Anyway, so what she wanted was just the opposite, and she got it. And even though she was very strong-willed, her husband, second husband, Henry, was even more strong-willed, and then life gets interesting. But the 8 children, and I just want to mention who they are because this, I'll take 2 seconds. In 1153, she gave birth to a son, William. 3 years later, he died. No explanation of how he died. 1155, Henry, second son, was born. He died from a fever at the age of 28. 1156, Matilda was born. She lived happily, married to the Duke of Saxony. 1157, Richard I, who became Richard the Lionheart, was born. And that was her preferred child for many, many reasons. And unfortunately, he died in 1199 at the age of 42. And he died because he got a stray arrow that hit him in the neck area, very deeply, embedded very deeply. He tried to pull it out. My son said you're not supposed to pull arrows out as they go into you because you bleed more. And I thought, well, that's good to know. But anyway, so he tried to pull it out, and he couldn't, and it broke. The head broke off his side. At which point, his group decided he was going to die if it was left there, so they did an operation, and he died from the operation, much to Eleanor's distress, because she saw him as a future person to lead the whole region. Okay, but that's his story. He died in 1199. The next son, the next child, was Geoffrey. He was born in 1158, and he died at 28 as well from being thrown from a horse. It may have been in a, what do you call it, when a jousting kind of thing. The next birth was in 62, and we named that daughter Eleanor. Then we have Joan, who was born in 65, and then finally in 67, we have John, who becomes John Lackland, who was the least preferred of her sons, the most scheming, the most unlikable, and he's the one, the only one, who lived beyond Eleanor as a son and one of her daughters. So one reason they had a lot of children was because so many of them died from so many problems. Fever, it's something that the drugs we have today would have taken care of, you know? Or they might have a rotten tooth that gets infected. Worse, Henry, her husband, died in 1189 because he had been kicked in the shin by a horse, which left a wound that festered. And all of a sudden, maybe because of all the effort of being in this rebellion with his sons, he physically was exhausted. We are almost certain he had gangrene, because he talked about the heat that was rising from his leg, and he couldn't, he died in 2 nights. Horrible suffering. So you wouldn't want to be ill at that period. All right. Now, the biggest next part, because that's 15 years of children. Now, this is the interesting part, because the 3 sons rebel against Henry because he has not allotted their inheritances equally, they think, meaning parts of the lands that he's saying you will have when you're a certain age. So they decide, they conspire, and Eleanor goes along with them. Why? Because she has just gotten fed up, because Henry has this very, very real love in England, Rosamund Clifford, after having many dalliances, but because this was true, really intense love, and he treated her like the queen, Eleanor got jealous. Now this is all, it's not supposition, but it's not something that she would write about. The point is that is part of the reason she joined her sons in the rebellion, because she was furious. And so there are a number of years here where there's nothing but war. Slowly everybody gets knocked off. Eleanor goes into retirement at the Abbey of Fontevraud, which she had endowed greatly, and I'll show you some pictures of it, but originally it had been founded in 1101 for a roaming monk, Robert of Arbristel, who believed that men and women should be in the same monastery, and that women should run the monastery. So Fontevraud began as a monastery like that. Men and women were there in separate living quarters, and the woman was in charge. And this was true up to the Revolution. That's an interesting point. I think that's mainly what I wanted to tell you about biographical names. Okay, how are we?
I'm going to shut off the light.
Thank you. Now I'm going to show you first what the countryside looks like, a little bit, so you get a sense of this. It does not look like Paris. I'll show you a bit what you saw as far as castles in that region. Then I'll follow Eleanor to Paris. And then when she marries Henry, I'll show you, because she took Henry for a long, long trip all around her territories. So I'll take you around to see what they were. Since that is there, we know they were there, and it's fact. That's very, very helpful. Let me just get a little water here. Hope this will go on. Sunflowers, yes. Did you know that in France, farmers are required to plant what the government tells them to plant? So one year it will be sunflowers because of its oil, and another year it will be rape seed, which gives you a wonderful oil also, but they alternate the years because it's good for the soil. So this was fortunate for us, but also rapeseed is beautiful. You get this beautiful greenish yellow field. But anyway, this is an example of the area around Poitou. The land is generally flat because it's going from the mountains of the middle of France down to the sea, so it's relatively flat. And you see in the distance there a church steeple, the tower, and that's a Romanesque church, but there are hundreds and hundreds of them still there. And sometimes you see nothing modern, and you can drive, you can walk, you can drive for ages and not see anything of the modern world. Everyone has cell phones, but you don't know that. All right. This is the light, there's just too much. Maybe we could close those doors. That would be excellent if someone could do that. it's amazing how having it in the daytime is, all right, so there's lots of vineyards. Eleanor was very instrumental in bringing wine to England, and eventually the claret that they loved so much came from this area, East Bordeaux. A medieval bridge. It might have been there when Eleanor was there, but there are enough of these to just be fascinating. Canals, because much of this area had been under the many big, smaller rivers that kind of patch dribbled, and so they canalized them, and they either fish or they grow things like polders in Holland. A fishing village, which once, in Eleanor's period, was on the ocean and was a very active port, and which now is just used for local deliveries. An 11th century castle built on top of a hill for strategic reasons, left in ruin. This is what's left of a wall, of an enclosure of a fortress. But this is the town of Cognac. You've all heard of Cognac. The cognac is all produced in this town. All of the names, Martel, Courvoisier, all these things. Anyway, you see those dripping black things on the walls. They call that the breath of the angel. In the air, the residue from the process of making the cognac. And every 3 or 4 years, they clean these, and they're white. And within a few years, they're just like that again. Here we'd say it's mold, but there they call it. And this is very crucial. This is the castle up there on the hill of Chinon, C-H-I-N-O-N. Because, just for your interest, Joan of Arc met the Dauphin of France there. That's, of course, much later. But Henry helped build this. It had already been there. This section here, Henry installed that. And later in this class, I'm going to show you something on this side of the hill. But anyway, Chinon was the major protective fortress that the Plantagenets had in France. It's very carefully located between the north and south, and it's on a river, the Vienne, that joins the Loire. So it's a very, very strategic place, Chinon. Henry dies there later. Eleanor gets locked up there by her husband. And this is a very interesting remnant of Loche, L-O-C-H-E, which shows you exactly how it was all done. You see that rectangular thing that rises up high? That is called the keep, or the donjon. And that would be where the family, you know, the ruling family would live. But that's where everyone else would go if there were a war and they had to get away. The walls are the protective agent, and that's a castle that has all its parts, and it's sort of nice to be able to show that. Sometimes you simply see the keep and the walls are gone, as in this case. This is a smaller version of a castle, but it's called Moncontour, and it is crumbling. And I want you to know that I'm down there right on the ground. I can point it out so it's the scenery. Now, that was the front door. Oh, yes. Why? Of course, so no one would come in, and they pulled a ladder in after they got up there. But I just thought you'd enjoy seeing the difficulties of life. And this is a beautiful scene of Chauvigny. And on the right, you see the church, which is magnificent, and on the left, you see the remnants of the fortress. Now, right here, they're on a little hill. They get lots of wind. And falcons love wind. They can just float on the wind. So there is a training school for falcons in the remains of that castle on the left. You can go there and for a fee, watch them, and they'll put them through all their. We did this once. It was quite wonderful. So in this region, people still use falcons for hunting, and it's a very active and ongoing sport. All right, now Eleanor is married and she's come to Paris. Gloomy Paris, not like this. Just so to remind you, Notre Dame was first the plans were first drawn up in 1162 or 3. And things are slow, you know, to build these things. And it wasn't, the front part was finished probably in 1220. So Eleanor would not have seen the front, but she would have known about the rest of it. But that's not enough to love Paris if it's all gray, muddy, and and the other thing is, Eleanor spoke a language different from the French in Paris. Some of you may know this. It depended on which way you said yes. The French said oui. And the people in Languedoc, the language of Oc, said Oc. So Eleanor was speaking something that resembles what we could now say Catalan. Catalan would be similar to this. It's not easy. It's really a different language, although it is the same root and everything. But it would have been difficult enough, so she had to learn that. And she always found when she was with people who spoke her language that she became more effervescent and was so much happier. Now, there was one trip that Eleanor made in 1145. 47 to 9, sorry, 45 to 45. These are pilgrims. This is from the Fidenza Cathedral. These are pilgrims who were going to cross the Apennines to make a trip to Rome. Pilgrims trekking along with their staff, dressing simply but warmly, etc. Here we have a 15th century manuscript showing us ships going to the Holy Land. And you recognize the Nile Delta there, the lower right, I think. What did Eleanor and her husband have in mind? Well, they joined the Second Crusade. And although they themselves did very little fighting, Eleanor none, of course, they wanted to go to Jerusalem to pray for a boy child. She had one girl at this point. So that was Eleanor's main point. But Eleanor also was looking forward to going to Antioch, which is very close to this wonderful Côte des Chevaliers, which is one of the really superb castles. It's really very amazing. Eleanor was going to meet her uncle Raymond, who was 12 years older than she, whom she had known very, very well all through her youth. She had always liked him, had a lot of fun with him, they joked, they sang so. Well, the bad-tonguers, most of whom were clerics and probably jealous, wrote that Eleanor did dreadful things with Raymond while they were visiting him in Antioch. And her husband, they say, wrapped her up in a rug and carried her out in the middle of the night to get her out of there. Well, I mean, that I think is nonsense, but they forcefully took Eleanor away. I don't have a picture of Antioch, but it doesn't matter, you get the gist of things. So that's where some of the really bad tonguing came along on Eleanor's character. Here we now are at Jerusalem at one of the many gates, and of course the people were very happy because they were happy that the French were coming and so forth. And so this is, Eleanor wanted to go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is what is in the foreground here, and was very happy to be here. Detail of this. I assure you, if the room were very dark, these would be very bright and very clear. I'm sorry that it's not better. Here I'm showing you a part of a sculpture of the returning pilgrim, returning crusader, but that's considered a pilgrim too. You can see the cross on his chest, which means he went to the Holy Land, and his wife, looking old and very protective, may have been by herself for 8 years trying to run a property and keep herself from being killed by marauders and who knows what. But anyway, and the thing is, when people went to crusade, they had no way of being in touch with anyone at home, so no one ever knew what happened to you. And you might never come back, so everyone did a will very carefully before they left. It took a great deal of bravery. So anyway, this is the only statue we have showing this kind of human response to these travels. Now, when they get back from Crusade. Eleanor has another baby. It's a girl. But that's two girls. That did it. And then, as I explained before, they managed to get a divorce. Can anyone tell me what that is? Gorse. Sometimes called broom, I think. Now, in France, this grows wildly everywhere. And I was saying, I've said this in other classes on occasion, so please don't mind me if I'm repeating. But the word in Latin is planta genesta, the genesta plant, planta genesta. The name Plantagenet comes from this because the father of Henry always had a little spray of planta genesta in his cap, and Henry followed that too. But just, it's interesting where the name, people didn't have last names. You were Priscilla of Winchester. So, it's interesting. Plus, it's a beautiful shop. All right, so here we are at Poitiers, and Eleanor is now giving a tour to Henry. And she's probably showing off a bit and giving a lot of, having things really, really good. All the lights and whistles. This is what's left of the Tour Mont-Verjean. During the period of Louis XIII, the towers were dismantled. This was a way of, making something no longer be a good, it just doesn't work as well. It's like taking, legs off a skier. I mean, you just can't. So anyway, this though is where she had her courts of love, where they had their parties, where she entertained, and where visitors were entertained. It's right in the center of Poitiers. And to the left, there was a building that didn't look like that exactly, but it was there, where they had a huge hall. And I will show you what it looks like. And so you can imagine Eleanor with the musicians, with the good food, plenty of wine, and these, on the spur of the moment, poems that people were singing and laughing about and so forth. I mean, it was very, very nice. She was so happy to be back there and to be able to show this to him. Now, they go off on a trip, and we would take an automobile, but they were on their horses. This is a place called Talmont, T-A-L-M-O-N-T, and it's a church, but the site of it is quite unusual. This is toward the end of the estuary where the Gironde River comes into the Atlantic. So there is a tide. The waters are close enough to get a tide. And they built a church there on this cliff, essentially. And over the years, part of it fell into the sea. So the church now looks very odd, and I'll show you a close-up. What fell off was what you don't see on the left. There was another section as large as what's there already that came out. And I think they had tried to fix it before, but I would presume this probably came out to here. Anyway, in the 15th century, it went down. So they left it that way. This is the Church of St. Radegund, and it is in typical Poitevin architecture, with lots of decoration in every part of the exterior. And in the front of the church, there would be sculpture. This, just to compare, is in Poitiers, and it was a baptistry that was there in the 4th century, and that part of it is still intact. Then it was built onto by the Merovingians. So what you see now is a kind of a rehab of the 7th century building. But I wanted you to see the kinds of paintings that Eleanor saw. Now, these are two apostles disputing or talking about the great, wonderful news that they're spreading. The entire inside of this church is covered with frescoes. Very lively, very, very well done. And here is a charming angel. You notice the soft colors. You don't see any navy blue. You don't see any gold. What you see is soft yellows, soft browns, lots of white, and you find an elegance of line. And certainly this is, I mean, just look at the hand. of that angel, the right hand, or the feet for that matter. Another church that she would have shown Henry is the Church of Saint-Sabin. Now, the steeple is of the Gothic and later added part. But the rest of the church is as it was, and it's one of the great prizes in France because it is the largest, has the largest group of frescoes intact from the 12th century. The entire nave ceiling, the barrel vault, from the entrance to the altar, is covered with scenes from the book of Genesis. Now, you only can see these if you lie down on the pew, because there's no other way. So when I took my tour students there, we all were lying on those pews. Here, for example, is what?
Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
And very carefully, the artist has made sure there are two animals, or two examples of each. You can sort of get that sense. Now this is the crossing of the Red Sea. And it has a wonderful section with lots of people with their shields on the ground, and you see the water. It looks more like drawings rather than paint, but it's a very active scene and very successful. You can see it from the ground well. But anyway, so that's an example of something that she would have seen. I'm trying to show you the types of art that she saw. Now, this is a typical church, village church of the region. And the example always follows the same rule. The church west front, which this is, and which is the entrance, the east being the important part because the sun comes up on that side and that's where the altar is. You think that there are three entrances here, right? Because you have arches, and normally when you see an arch like that in Romanesque, it has to be there for a purpose. Well, they just don't do that. They want you to just enjoy the three arches. There is one door. That's odd. But everything on this west front that can be decorated is decorated. Everything. Then you go around the church, and it's rare to find anything else. So this is like a stage design. It's smashing. And I will show you more and better examples, but this is a typical one. And from there, here is one of the capitals, which I have to find very amusing. Sunlight was just right for it. You notice that it's losing its sharp contours, and that's from the air, the saline air, where they're so close to the ocean. Now this is another capital, very, very high up from another church, and it is depicting the vice of lechery, always a woman. A woman who's got, she's like this, and she's being eaten by different monsters. And then you've got all those cats leering. Cats were a symbol of evil, and Jezebel and cats go together. So anyway, this is high up, and we like it. Well, Roger and I like it because it's being covered, sort of protected by the growth on it. Now, I mentioned that Eleanor liked to horseback ride, and everyone else liked to go to hunt and so forth. And even today, people are crazy for the hunt. Everyone does it. And this is an interesting archivolt because you see this kind of guillotine, which is very common in Normandy, but nothing else is here. And you find horse heads with their teeth on the molding all the way around. Now that's very unusual, and there are about five examples of this in the area. And then you have people aligned on the outside there, and I'm not sure, they have no clothes on, and they're women. Oh yes, and they have little devils. Well, those are lecherous women too, but they're not quite as bad as the other one. So that you could spend hours and hours just deciphering and enjoying the rhythm. But if you just crossed your eyes a little, so it gets out of focus, it's a wonderful design. It's throughout the 1100s, yes. Now this is Eleanor's joy. It's a church in Poitiers called Notre Dame la Grande, only because there was a smaller Notre-Dame church nearby, which is now gone. So anyway, this is in Poitiers, and it recently was cleaned. And I will show you how every aspect of that surface is covered. There's a detail of St. Peter holding his keys, but you see how the arch he is under is this fantastic plant, imaginary plant development, and then there's a lacy section of work, and then the knots and everything. So it's this almost alive decoration. This is above one of the doorways. Every archivolt has a different story or a different motif. And the stone is this beautiful gold color, so it's really wonderful. Here's a detail. Just to show the effect. I'm not trying to tell you any of the stories. Yes, someone's asking if the artisans are local. Medieval masons were itinerants, and they went where they were asked to come. And when they came for a church that was a large church, like Notre Dame, there would be a 100-year period where the father, the son, and then the grandson would all be working there as the others died or got too tired to do it. But here, it's just the front. The rest of the church doesn't have this. So it would have been a faster job, and then they would have gone on somewhere else. So here it is from the front. The sides have nothing. The back has a tower, but nothing. And the single door with the blind arcades on either side. And then they have a sound and light program in the summer where they light it up and everyone drinks wine. And here is a picture of it lit up. And you may laugh, but in the Middle Ages, it would have all been painted. Now, if you look at that, doesn't it look garish? But they have found, I mean, this is very authentic. I mean, this is the center for this kind of research, Poitiers, medieval research. But when you see a little bit of red on the stone, you think, oh, there's a little bit of paint there. But then when you put it all over that particular surface and you add up all what you got, it's extremely gaudy. Is there anyone here who would prefer the painted version? See, I can see. You're right, and that's why, and you know, the Greeks always painted the exteriors of their temples with stripes and bright colors so that you could tell from afar who was who. And here, that color helps you see there are different divisions. And you would always know who was a king because they would paint the crown gold. You know, there'd be some things you would know. So that's the good point. I mean, you do know, or you can see, and then you can figure out better. So there are two ways of looking at it.
Were there two doors?
Pardon?
Were there two doors? What is it?
No, the upper one is a window.
Oh.
Sorry. Good question. Go back, I'll show you the window. It still doesn't show, but it's a stained glass window. Okay, so that was in her city of Poitiers. And she and Henry left money to build the cathedral. The cathedral was only built like the, I don't know, mid-13th century, but they were starting it. And what Eleanor and Henry did was leave money for a stained glass window. And I will show you the stained glass window because it has an image of Eleanor and Henry. And we will talk about images later, you know, if I can talk fast enough. Here's the window. You can't see much. It's a crucifixion with an ascension, with all the apostles. There are all kinds of things happening. And then, right down here and here, you have a crowned woman and a crowned man in the donor position on their knees, offering this, which would be the building of the cathedral. Now, it's the smallest thing on this whole, this is huge. It fills everything from the top to bottom. And it's hiding behind the altar. So if you're looking, if you're there, you can't see it. You have to go behind the altar. Roger took this behind the altar. And it's too bad because, but anyway, then it doesn't look like anybody. It's a generic, it could be anybody with a crown. But that's supposed to be Eleanor and Henry. There they are. That's the big one I didn't drop. All right, let's see if I can get this focused. You can see that there's nothing of interest there. In fact, you'd never even notice it if I hadn't mentioned it. Here's the hard thing that's supposed to be the church, and they're both kneeling and they have crowns. So, here's where we go into elusive again. Now, I'm moving into the whole question of imagery. This plaque shows the father of Henry, and it was done after he died to fit as a memorial to him. So this is Geoffrey Plantagenet. Now, as far as portraiture goes, this is not portraiture. What it is a very decorative image of everything that goes with a certain office. For example, these lines refer to either the veil, that squirrel I mentioned, or ermine lining his cape. Everything is beautiful and full of luxury, and there's gold, and there are jewels lining his hem. And he has long reddish hair, which apparently Henry also did, not long but reddish. He has his shield, and then his face is about as blank as any face could be. It's a typical, attractive, young, generic face. So that's the best that could be done in 1151, or the best that wanted to be done. Now, here we have King John the Good, and this painting was done before he died in 1360 or 61, and it's the first portrait that we think we have in the modern world. I mean, that's how it's described in our history. Probably there were others, but this is the earliest, where a painting tried to depict the actual characteristics, and maybe even the character, of the person being painted. And certainly nobody tried to make him look like a gorgeous man. And some of them were really bad. So, this is the first one. So we're talking about 1360, Eleanor died in 1204. You have a huge difference before, the idea of even wanting a portrait had occurred.
Where was that?
This painting is in the Louvre, and the mosaic is in Le Montville. This actually is the star painting. It's a relatively small panel, but it's what has you enter into French painting. Go up some stairs, and there he is, and then you go in, and there's all these wonders. But anyway, he's quite a favorite of everybody.
Yeah.
You like it? Oh, well, good. You're just so glad to see something different. It's like a human being. All right, now, I'm doing a little thing here on images. This shows you some of the portals at Chartres Cathedral. And the jambs have life-size figures around each door of Old Testament kings and queens. The only problem is they have halos, which they often gave to Old Testament people. But we don't know who is who, but let me show you what we think, some people think. On the left side, south north door, we have a king and a queen here. And this queen is quite attractive. And he is young and quite attractive. And so people would like to think that this is Eleanor and Henry. And there's a detail. Now, I disagree, because I don't care who they are, because they look just like all the other sculptures of this ilk. They liked slender noses, straight. They were very happy to show you that they could do different kinds of hairdos, so that didn't tell you anything about the person. She has a long braid, which was the style, and which several of the other images on the frontal shot has. She's placid, timeless, staring straight ahead. And it's not a portrait. Now, if you go to New York City, someday you will go to see the Cloisters Museum, which is outside and up on Fort Tryon Park. How many of you have been to the Cloisters? Oh, I'm thrilled because it's something very special. And this is a chapel that was taken from Langon, Langon, near Bordeaux. And there is a capital right up there, a double capital, of a man and a woman's head with crowns. Beautiful face for both of them, and everyone says it's Eleanor and Henry. But that's possible because she went into this chapel on her tour with her first husband when they were married in Bordeaux. So there are reasons. Now, here's the story of Priscilla of Winchester, who has gotten the key to what I think I'm going to find at the top of the stairs. I got the key at the, at the mairie of Chinon, and had no idea I'd have to hike up so much. There are a lot. I'm not even showing them all to you. And then at the top of this, I open a door. Now, if I had a ladder, I could just climb over the wall because there is no roof. But this is it's an 11th century church which then was painted over with whitewash. And the rector, or somebody, must have been somebody cleaning, found, you'll see those little marks up there, found a fresco, and I'll show it to you, which was done just after Eleanor died. And it is what I think is the closest we get to any kind of, because it was near, now she wouldn't have been that active at the end of her life. However, we are pretty sure that the person with her, she has no crown, and her hair is sort of down, meaning that she was not yet who she was going to be, which was the wife of John. And so, and it's true that she came to visit Eleanor. And so that's Isabelle of Angoulême, Eleanor. The front one is damaged, but it was a man. And then there's someone there with a falcon on the left. And it looks as if Eleanor's reaching for the falcon. And you see the lining of her coat, her cloak? That's ermine for you, or the bear. But that's about the best thing. Now, if she didn't have the crown on, we wouldn't know who it was. And it certainly is not a real portrait. Now, we're drawing toward the close here. When she was 77, Eleanor decided to retire and take her chancellery to Fontevraud. Now, Fontevraud is a monastery, and she and Henry did a lot to bestow it. And it ended up at that time, it was at the height of its glory in the 12th century. But it was really a retirement home for very aristocratic queens and other people who had nowhere else to go or who preferred to come here. And they were treated with great care, and nobody knows whether they followed all the monastic rules, but it didn't matter. It was definitely like a retirement home. Eleanor decided to retire there. She still was gone an awful lot of the time. But at that time, she put a defensive wall around it because this is right between the northern part and the southern part of this vast region. And she felt that it might come in handy to have a wall, as it did. But anyway, so she retired here and ultimately may have died here. This is how the church, this is a very simple church. Now, the northern part of this region has very simple churches with no decoration on the outside. And then the southern part that I showed with all the sculpture is more actively covered. The interior is domed. That's something that you see in this area constantly. During the period of Napoleon, after the French Revolution and through Napoleon's period, this building was used as a prison for really rough criminals. And they built 3 stories, cut out the domes, wrote a lot of the capitals, had a railroad in there because they had munitions or something that they were funneling through at one point. So the picture I saw in 1905 has a railroad track going through the church, and it looks awful. There's nothing on the ceiling. I mean, the light is coming through. So a lot has been done to get it back to its real. Just to tell you that nothing ever stays the same. Now, there's a lovely cloister at Fontevraud, and that's where she would have strolled around, sat on the little benches, bench area on the right. And here is the building that is just so absolutely extraordinary. This is a kitchen. Now, it's far away from the actual place because they're always so afraid of fires. So it's far away from where she would be eating. It is a 12th century kitchen with 8 or 9 fireplaces under these sections. Yeah, I think they're 8. And at the top, there's a hole for the smoke to go out. And these are huge, by the way. And they're built just as if it were a church, so you've got terrific architecture. I'll show you inside. The roof itself is that very typical for this region. These imbrications takes a year just to get a few of them done. And then this is the hole seen from the bottom. So, in case you were wondering about how they ate. Now this is an old slide showing the way the 4 effigies were placed. Because this is really the necropolis of the Plantagenets. Henry wanted to be buried here. Eleanor wanted to be buried here. The other 2 people, one of them is the wife who had no crown on the horse, Isabella of Angoulême, of John, the wife of John, who didn't have any choice in the matter. And then the other is Richard. Richard had gotten the arrow, right? They couldn't get it out, he died. So they decided to put him here. But everyone was very happy to be here. It was sort of like the family, place. It's no longer like that. And I'll show you now the later pictures. Okay. This is an example of Richard. This is Henry, sorry. And Henry had a lance, which has disappeared. But again, generic pictures. This could be anybody. And here we have Henry and Eleanor, who is reading. There they are all together. And here's a close-up of her. Now it's interesting, because she has a crown on too. Well, we know she could read, and we know that. But also someone, a historian recently said, it's a reference to the Book of Kings. In other words, she had such an extraordinary mind, and what I never mentioned to you was her husband locked her up for 16 years. Starting at Chino, this was when the rebellion occurred. She tried to escape. She disguised herself as a man. They caught her. And her husband treated her very courteously, but he kept her under lock and key for the next 16 years. And had he not died in 1189, she would have been there for a lot longer. Now, during that time, we don't know what she did. We don't know who she was allowed to see. But the fact that she could read is an enormous asset in times of that sort. And when she came out, she was a dynamo and was very, very strong in helping Richard become crowned at Westminster, of getting a cohesion again between the nobles so they would follow the Plantagenets. She did everything she could, and then Richard was killed. So then it was really bad. And even as she died, that same year, the French king had started taking over Normandy. And within a few years, everything the Plantagenets had tried to do was finished, gone. So it's, but anyway, I love the fact that she's still got her crown on and is reading and looks so peaceful. And I am hoping that her peacefulness will include a view like this on her lovely country. So that's my final shot. Okay, let me turn this off, and then we can see what questions there might be. Okay, anything you'd like to ask?
never lived in England.
Yes. She lived in England and was imprisoned in England, in Salisbury and in Winchester. Most of those 16 years, she knew only at the beginning, because he wanted her to be as far away from France and where her friends were. So he put her there. And he moved her frequently from one place to another. But she was in England much of the time. But she'd already known England, too, before the rebellion. She had 20 years to do it. Yes?
I'm reminded of the movie, The Lion in Winter. Now, this is tied in with all this, and I'm trying to go through with the lion and hasn't happened with.
Well, I'm not sure. I would presume it was the king who turned on Eleanor, you know, the way a lion would. That's what I think, but maybe not. I saw that so long ago. What I
So
did
did I, but it
it seemed to
brings
me
back-
all they did was yell.
Yes.
And I just have a very bad, I mean, you know, Catherine Hepburn is fine and dandy, but, you know, I have an idea that Eleanor was elegant.
Yeah.
And, I mean, she was too, Catherine, but her voice just,
Somehow the story of that was tied in.
Yes.
See, with-
uh-huh. Well, that's what it was supposed to be doing, but it was just a section of it. So you didn't see the first husband, you wouldn't have seen the crusade part. Yeah.
I had always associated the Plantagenets with England.
Yeah.
And I was very surprised to hear about their origination in France.
I know.
So who would have been the first Plantagenet king of England?
The father, Henry the First.
Henry the First.
Henry the First, King of England. And then Henry the Second got it because of the death of several people. And so it worked out that way. He didn't foresee that. But he did a wonderful job once he became king, Henry II, of trying very hard to organize things and to get them. You know, he did a lot of good things. I think he may have been a very difficult person, but he certainly was a good organizer. But yes, he spent a long time. Yes.